A sudden silence fell across the crowded summit hall as cameras clicked, diplomats whispered, and screens around the world lit up with the same headline: Vladimir Putin had just suffered one of the most public diplomatic setbacks of his career. It wasn't a battlefield loss. It wasn't an economic collapse. It was something far more humiliating, being openly sidelined, challenged, and undermined in front of the world's most influential leaders. As the moment spread across global news, analysts instantly recognized it as a turning point. This is where the story begins, and it's a story packed with tension, unexpected twists, and a level of embarrassment rarely seen for a leader who prides himself on strength. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Conflict Front Stories channel. Please subscribe and like my videos to support the work we do here. The day began with an exterior shot of the international summit venue, a sleek, shining glass structure surrounded by security barriers and convoys of armored SUV. From the outside, it looked like any other gathering of world powers. But beneath the surface, pressure had been building for weeks. Several nations were preparing for a coordinated diplomatic stance against Russia, and although rumors had leaked, no one expected the confrontation to unfold so openly or so sharply. The air outside buzzed with reporters, drones, and rapid-fire commentary, but nothing prepared the global audience for the spectacle that was about to unfold inside. Inside the grand conference hall, the interior atmosphere was tense but polished. Delegates shuffled through their documents, earpieces signaled translations, and world leaders took their seats with practiced confidence. Putin walked in expecting control after all. He had survived decades of criticism, sanctions, and political isolation. But this moment was different because it wasn't just one country challenging him. It was a coalition of leaders, each prepared to send a message that Russia's recent political moves and aggressive posturing would no longer be tolerated quietly. The interior silence that followed his entrance spoke louder than applause ever could. Moments into the opening session, the first diplomatic blow landed. A major Western leader, normally cautious and deliberate, publicly confronted Putin over actions that had destabilized regional security. The statement was sharp, precise, and delivered with full confidence. Cameras captured Putin's reaction, a subtle tightening of the jaw, a narrowed gaze, a shift in posture. For a man known for controlling narratives, this moment was the opposite. It was live, unfiltered, and politically painful. Analysts around the world immediately recognized it as a rare moment where diplomatic language transformed into direct criticism. Outside the summit building, the media frenzy intensified. Exterior shots showed reporters rushing to broadcast what they had just witnessed. Headlines flashed across screens: Putin challenged, unexpected confrontation rocks summit, Russia faces united pressure. The global reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly focused on how unusual it was for world leaders to speak so bluntly in a formal setting. Even countries that typically kept neutral began quietly signaling support for the criticism, adding another layer to Putin's embarrassment. Inside the private meeting rooms, the interior discussions were even more troubling for the Russian delegation. One after another, leaders voiced concerns about Russia's role in escalating tensions across several regions. Some referenced economic manipulation, others pointed to diplomatic interference, and some highlighted security risks. The Russian side attempted to counter the allegations, but every response seemed weaker than the last. Putin's team realized they were not just facing criticism, they were facing a coordinated diplomatic wall. Back in the main session hall, the second major blow came when a group of European leaders announced a joint policy decision made without consulting Russia. This was unprecedented. For years, even hostile countries maintained a pattern of involving Russia in major diplomatic frameworks, but this time Russia was excluded by design. The message was clear: Moscow's influence was no longer guaranteed. Putin visibly stiffened, unable to hide his frustration. Cameras zoomed in, Commentary exploded online, and the moment quickly went viral. For someone who built an image on global authority, being sidelined in such a visible way delivered a deep symbolic defeat. Outside, exterior shots captured protesters waving signs and chanting slogans related to Russia's controversial actions. Many of them represented diaspora communities, activists, and human rights groups demanding accountability. This added another layer to the story because it showed that public sentiment was strongly aligned against the Russian government. As voices outside grew louder, the political pressure inside the summit grew heavier. Reporters narrated every detail, filling the global conversation with speculation about how the Kremlin would respond. Inside a quieter press conference room, the interior setting felt far more awkward for Russian officials. When a journalist asked about the embarrassment Putin faced, the spokesperson stumbled through an answer, trying to reframe the situation as unimportant. But the lack of confidence was obvious, and the clip was quickly shared across social media platforms. Memes appeared, analysts offered instant emotional readings, and political satire programs around the world seized the moment. What might have been a single diplomatic setback was rapidly turning into an international spectacle. As the summit continued, another exterior development unfolded. Several major nations signed a public declaration linking future cooperation to transparent, rule-based behavior, an indirect but unmistakable message aimed at Russia. The signing ceremony took place outside against a backdrop of flags and cameras. Putin was not present. His absence said more than his presence ever could have. Commentators described it as the most symbolic moment of the summit, a clear visual representation of Russia's diminishing influence on the world stage. Inside the Russian delegation's private quarters, the interior discussion became increasingly tense. Advisors disagreed on whether to retaliate harshly or attempt a softened diplomatic approach. Some argued that Russia must project strength to counter the embarrassment. Others warned that escalating the situation would only deepen Russia's isolation. Putin listened in silence, but his expression revealed a mixture of anger and calculation. He understood the seriousness of the setback because this time it wasn't about losing territory or economic ground. It was about losing credibility. As news platforms around the world replayed the confrontation, outside the venue, long lines of journalists gathered for official statements. Exterior shots showed officials from multiple countries giving calm, confident responses, emphasizing unity and stability. Yet none of them defended Russia or softened their tone. This signaled a widespread shift in diplomatic attitudes. Even formerly neutral nations began voicing subtle criticism, focusing on the need for transparency, cooperation, and responsible behavior. The international community was, for the moment, aligned. Inside the closing ceremony, the interior lighting dimmed as speeches were delivered summarizing the outcomes of the summit. Every accomplishment highlighted cooperation, collective decision-making, and shared goals. But Russia, once a major geopolitical influencer, found itself mentioned only briefly and mostly in contexts of concern. Putin sat stiffly, trying to maintain composure, but the message was impossible to ignore. This was a diplomatic blow not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't said. After the summit, exterior footage showed Putin exiting the venue without giving a press conference. This alone became a headline. Leaders who normally spoke cautiously about Russia now openly expressed frustration with its policies. Commentators noted that Putin's refusal to face the press added to the perception of weakness. Some described it as one of the most isolating moments of his leadership. Russia's allies offered minimal support, carefully choosing ambiguous language to avoid damaging their own global reputations. Inside the Kremlin, upon Putin's return, the interior mood was somber. Former advisors and political analysts inside Russia privately admitted that the summit had been a disaster. Some worried that the weakened image would affect future negotiations, while others feared it might embolden Russia's rivals. Putin reportedly demanded detailed internal reports on how the diplomatic situation escalated so quickly, but even his closest officials understood the truth. The global reaction had grown too large and too fast for damage control. Outside in Moscow, exterior interviews revealed mixed responses among citizens. Some believed the sum, it was biased against Russia, but many expressed concern that the country was becoming too isolated internationally. Economists warned that diplomatic humiliation could have long-term consequences, affecting investment, trade, and foreign relations. Political commentators predicted that Russia would attempt a forceful response to restore its image, though many acknowledged that restoring trust would be far more difficult. Inside the global political community, interior conversations continued long after the summit ended. Leaders met privately to discuss how to maintain pressure while avoiding escalation. Several nations strengthened their diplomatic ties with each other, focusing on collective security and accountability. Russia, once seen as a central power in global decision-making, found itself facing a new landscape where influence had to be earned rather than assumed. The exterior world reacted quickly. Editorials, investigative reports, expert analyses, and televised debates filled the media environment for days. Each segment highlighted the same theme: Putin had lost significant diplomatic ground, and the world had witnessed it live. Some commentators called it a historic turning point, arguing that Russia's political positioning had fundamentally changed. Others warned that Putin would try to regain influence through aggressive posturing. But the common thread was clear: this embarrassment had long-lasting implications. Inside tank centers and policy rooms across Europe and Asia, the interior discussions grew increasingly strategic. If Russia was weakening diplomatically, it created opportunities for new alliances and cooperation. Several countries began planning joint initiatives in energy, defense, and regional development without involving Russia at all. This was perhaps the most subtle but most damaging consequence of the summit. Decisions made without Russia would shape entire geopolitical landscapes. Back in the Kremlin's press office, interior frustration grew as Russian officials attempted to spin the narrative. They released carefully crafted statements insisting that the summit had been productive, but few believed the claims. Independent analysts dissected every angle, pointing out inconsistencies and highlighting Russia's lack of influence during key decisions. The Russian public remained uncertain while global markets reacted cautiously. Outside, as the world moved forward, the political ripple effect continued. Several nations announced new diplomatic meetings, sanctions reviews, and cooperative measures, all taking place without Russian participation. This illustrated the lasting impact of the embarrassment. It showed that the international community had reached a new level of unity, one that Putin could not easily challenge. Inside academic circles, interior discussions focused on how this moment compared to historical examples of diplomatic isolation. Many scholars argued that while Russia had faced criticism before, this moment was unique because the world had witnessed it collectively and instantly. It wasn't a behind-the-scenes negotiation collapse. It was a public display of declining influence. Eventually, as exterior shots of world leaders boarding their planes played across the news, one message remained consistent across reports: Putin's attempt to project strength had backfired. Instead of commanding respect, he had been confronted, sidelined, and diplomatically exposed. The embarrassment resonated not only with foreign nations, but also with internal Russian circles, where questions about the long-term consequences began surfacing. The story ends where it began, with a moment that shook global perception. The diplomatic blow delivered at that sum. It will be remembered not because of a single statement, but because of the unity behind it. For Putin, whose power has long depended on political control and global influence, this setback marks a significant turning point. The world watched him lose the one thing he relied on most, the appearance of certainty. And in international politics, perception is often as powerful as reality. Thanks for watching this detailed breakdown of a major diplomatic moment. If you enjoyed this explanation, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Stay tuned for more analysis and updates right here on Conflict Front Stories.